Welcome. This started as a San Diego chapter event, but I know we have quite a few people who are tuning in from around the country, and that is just so great to see. And I haven't met most of you in person, but I look forward to changing that as soon as not only possible, but also safe. And for those that don't know me, my name is Olivier Pitish. I am a class of 2004, and I am the president of the San Diego Alumni Chapter. In my other job, I am a lead advisor with Dowling & Yankee, which is an independent wealth management firm with a 30-year history here in San Diego. We're currently working with over 1,200 families, corporations, and nonprofits. And most of you know this, but the San Diego Alumni Chapter is very diverse and active, and we have an outstanding board, and we like getting together. And I think we are all discovering that the virtual format works great, is here to stay, and we just hope that it stops being the exclusive format for our events very soon. So why are we talking today about mastering communication in high stakes situations? And I think, first of all, because as a nation, we are having exactly those kinds of conversations right now. The coronavirus epidemic, addressing racial injustice, the upcoming presidential election, climate change, all those are very weighty topics. And on a personal level also, most of us will face at some point soon, perhaps, a conversation like that, a high stakes conversation, negotiating a big contract, helping an unhappy customer, pitching your boss for a salary increase, etc. So I think that's one of the reasons so many of you have registered. And the other one, I'm sure, is our guest, Peter, whom many of you know already, and we'll get to him properly in a second. Before that, as far as the technology platform Zoom that we're using today, I have a couple of quick comments to make. And first of all, we are in what is called webinar mode, which means your voice will be muted and you will not be visible on the screen. You also have access to a Q&A box and a chat box located at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box, and both Peter and I will see them, and we can address as many as we can during the session. And if we don't get to all of them, we can reach out after the session using the email you have registered with. But we ask that you do not use the chat box for questions. Peter and I will monitor the Q&A box instead. Another thing I would recommend is, as we go through the session, I encourage you to write down things that resonate strongly with you. You can always improve your communication skills, starting with the first meeting after this one. Lastly, recording and playback. A few folks already asked if the content will be made available, and we will try. Definitely we'll give it our best shot, and we'll try to make the recording available perhaps on the chapter's YouTube channel. And Peter has also graciously agreed to share his slides with you. Now, to get us warmed up, I'm going to pull up a quick poll. And because we're trying to record this, I will also read the poll for everybody. So the poll is in progress now. The question is, what is your biggest obstacle to having high stakes conversations in your professional life? First option, I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. It feels easier to just tolerate the issue. I am uncomfortable with conflict. Previous high stakes conversations didn't change anything. And I don't want to lose my cool. Cool is important. And we'll give it a few moments to see some answers.
And you may think of many of these as reasons why. Unfortunately, we're challenging you to pick just one. Pick the one that feels the most prominent to you.
Okay, and I see the answers. Wow, everybody's engaged. All right, this is probably going to be very stable from now on. About 80% of the folks voted already. And it looks like the number one on a tie is folks being uncomfortable with conflict, and previous high stakes conversations didn't change anything. I will stop the polling, and Peter, I think those were kind of interesting answers. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we go in with a lot of stories around how these difficult conversations could go. That can be based on a variety of things, including not wanting to hurt someone's feelings, being uncomfortable with the conflict itself. And if you've had these conversations in the past and they didn't go well, or they didn't lead to any results that were of value to you, it makes you start to wonder why go through that discomfort if we're going to be in the same place at the end of this. But I think my hope for this conversation is you'll identify some steps that can build your preparedness, your comfort, so that you can move forward in those in a way that you feel is serving you and is serving the others. And as we look at the results now, you can see that they're pretty nicely distributed, a lot of different reasons, and we'll cover off on many of those today.
Well, before we go too far, and I know this is really exciting for you too, Peter, I want to give you a proper introduction. So Peter is a Hudson Institute certified executive coach, and he works with individuals and teams. He helps clients access their personal power as they make progress towards their goals. And this ranges from taking greater ownership of their career and leadership style to accessing aspects of challenging situations or relationships that are within their control to change. And strengthening communication skills is a very component, as far as I understand, of almost every engagement for you, Peter. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So I know you've worked with leaders from manager level to CEOs at startups and Fortune 500 companies. You've worked with individuals in various sectors. But I do want to share that on a personal note, perhaps, you are one of the first people I met at Anderson. And I was a first-year student. Right. And together with Glenn Lyday, you guys were orientation leaders for our early morning section B section.
That is, I switched from the dark side of the afternoon or the late morning sections. I was a sectioneer myself, and gladly joined your group.
Well, so that was hard to believe, but that was 18 years ago. And so welcome, and officially a huge thank you for agreeing to give us a bit of your time today and help us with such an important topic. Now, I'd love to hear, how did you get into coaching, and was that orientation leader one of your first taste in coaching and mentoring?
You know, I hadn't really thought about it, but I do think it was one of the first ones. I think I landed in coaching by accident, not by design, but on retrospection, I think it was the job I've been preparing my whole life to do. I just didn't know it existed. So 6 years ago, I'd started my 10th year in the toy industry. I turned 40 and I became a dad for the first time. And that convergence of events planted the seed that climbing the leadership hill in the toy industry stopped being as appealing as it used to be. And I became curious about what else was out there. And was fortunate enough to be presented with an opportunity to join the Drucker Institute, which is a nonprofit at the Claremont colleges based on the management principles of Peter Drucker.
Oh, sure.
And what that afforded me was a chance to get diverse experience outside of toy, but also learn some of the principles of coaching, because we were helping people access what decisions they wanted to make, and they in turn supported me in going to get certified, so I could use best practices around coaching instead of just shooting from the hip.
And so that was a few years ago, and you've been very successful in building your own brand and portfolio of clients and engagement today. Share please with us a little bit some examples of teams or companies, clients, engagements that you are delivering.
Sure. So there's three major areas of the work that I do. I do transition coaching, including career coaching. And I got a lot of that experience thanks to Anderson by spending 2 years at the Parker Career Management Center, okay. Which allowed me to hone my skills. And so I'm honored to get to work with people as they are contemplating transitions. I do executive coaching, working with leaders that want to stay in the organization that they are in. Some examples would be working with a senior executive in a national bank around how can he connect his values with and the way that he delivers them with an audience that comes with a very different set of a different lens. And so making sure that his intent matches up with how people receive it. So a lot of work around emotional intelligence. Another example would be working with a team that is a startup, all accomplished leaders on their own, but wanting to establish a culture for their organization, which could be easy to say is not a priority when there's just 4 people. But I believe, and so does evolution, that it's much easier to establish a culture at the very beginning than to try to change it and evolve it once you're 50 plus employees.
Sure. So all these engagements have a strong communication component, but they do go beyond just the component of communication.
That's right. I mean, we can look at really 3 different levels of all of these engagements. There's the I level. What is it that I need to build personal awareness on? How can I lead myself, work towards any goals that are coming up for me? There's the we level, interrelational, and that's primarily where the communication falls into place. And then the it level. What are the systems, the processes, the structures that exist at an organizational level to set up success? And so as a coach and a consultant, I'm happy to drill down or up or do a combination of all 3 as needed.
I like that. I don't think I've heard that. The I, the we, and the it, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, so I think the content you're presenting today is very relevant. Can we share, if somebody wants to engage with you after this, either with this content or some of the other topics that you mentioned, how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. So up on slide now is my contact information, my cell phone, and my Evolution email. You can also see the Evolution website, evolution.team. In addition to that, all of my information is up to date on the UCLA Anderson alumni page. So I invite any alums to reach out and connect with me through there.
Okay. Well, awesome. I'm really excited. I'm ready. I'm going to take notes. I'm going to get my takeaways. And so, Peter, I'll turn it over to you, and let's have this conversation today.
Thanks, Olivia. And one thing I want to add for the whole audience is, while this is in webinar mode, we want to keep this as organic and conversational as possible. So please feel free to continue to post any questions in the Q&A. Olivia may draw our attention there from time to time, and we'll have a breaking point at each transition of theme to see if we can answer a few of those. Any questions that we don't get to, I'm happy to follow up with you individually to respond to. But
we have one question that I think we can address right now. How many people are on this webinar? And we have 71 participants as of now.
Wow. Well, nice to connect with all of you and hope to connect on a more personal level later on. But as Olivia and I were thinking about what would be a relevant topic for today, communication was the one that came forward most prominently for me. And that's because if I look at the coaching engagements, both at an individual level and a team level I've had over the last 6 years, I'd be hard pressed to find one where communication wasn't a part of it. And it's not something that's driven by what level or how much experience you have. Whether you are a current MBA student or someone who's been a CEO for decades, there's room to move forward on the continuum of better and more effective communication. We're going to talk about 4 specific areas in particular. First is navigating crucial conversations, and I'll define what that means in just a moment. Then we're going to drill down on one of those types of conversations in particular, which is giving and receiving feedback. We'll talk about some powerful questions, and these are particularly questions you can be asking yourself. Yes, we do need to communicate with ourselves. And then lastly, an acknowledgement of our realities of working from home and distance experiences. What are some ways that we can use communication to lead effectively? And those are tools that will hopefully serve us when coronavirus is in our rearview mirror. So what defines a crucial conversation? And this is actually from a book titled Crucial Conversations. I highly recommend it, and there's even a great audiobook version of it that I've listened to in the car. There's 3 criteria. There's opposing views, strong emotions, and the stakes are high. That creates the powerful combination. If there are only 3 things that you remember from our talk today, it would be these 3 questions that I'd want you to take away. As you are preparing for a crucial conversation, I want you to ask yourself, what do I want for myself? What do I want for others? And what do I want for the relationship? And that will hopefully help you separate what are the things that might be frustrating or feel important to you, but aren't necessarily applying to the answers to any of those 3 questions, and really help you focus.
And Peter, the second point there is, make sure I get this correctly. What do I want for others if I were in their shoes, kind of thing, right? Like you're thinking it's not a zero-sum negotiation game. It's how can everybody be better off after this interaction?
Exactly. So an example of what it is not is I want you to hear my point of view. What I want for others might be that I want to find a way that the 2 of us can work more productively together for mutual benefit. If someone phrases that, it's hard for me to say no to it because it's something that helps me and helps them.
Sure, got it, yep.
Okay, so before you even begin the conversation, you want to think about psychological safety. And that's this idea that it is a safe place for people to talk openly, authentically, and without fear of making a mistake that cannot be recovered from. And there's a few ways that we can do that. The 4 that I'm going to talk about are here. First is find a mutual purpose. So this is a little bit what I referred to before. We both want a better relationship. We both want to achieve business results together, something that works for both of you. The second is it's important to acknowledge that when there is conflict or different points of view, there are often at least 2 parties involved. And so if there's something that you've done to contribute to the situation, it can really do a lot to disarm the other person if you acknowledge your role in this. So if you've done something to offend the other person, acknowledge it and be sincere. This is reinforcing that you are not pointing the direct blame in one direction. An example, you have an employee that asks you yesterday afternoon if they could take the week of 4th of July off. I know that I was short with you when you asked yesterday if you could take next week off. I apologize. So the next step is then to contrast. And what's important here is lead with what you don't mean and then say what you do mean. So in the example of the person that asked to take vacation without much notice, the last thing I want to do is give you the impression I do not want you to take vacation. You're establishing first, avoiding any doubts that they have about what could be a deeper issue of, my boss doesn't believe I deserve to take time off. They don't believe I've earned it or anything else. So clarifying that and then pivoting to, I do want you to understand how important it is for us to have advance notice of your vacation request. And then this last step, recognize the purpose behind the strategy. So this can come up when it may appear on surface that you two have different purposes. And I'll use an example from personal life. Imagine that one of you, you're in a personal relationship and one of you is an extrovert and the other one is a total introvert. And given that we're spending most of our time at home right now, let's think more to pre-COVID times. We both want to unwind from our hectic weeks. You want to relax and I want to connect with friends. I'd like for us to find a way to do both. So this, the purpose behind it is that I'm not trying to convince you that we're going to do my way at the expense of yours. I want to figure out how can we achieve both of our goals.
So Peter, you're saying here, words are important. You're not suggesting you just need to learn a scripted kind of set of sentences, but you do want to think about these high-level points, the mutual purpose. If there's an apology that's needed, make sure you give it and it's genuine. Be clear in what you're saying, because otherwise communication doesn't happen. And again, recognize there's a purpose behind what you're trying to accomplish, as opposed to you just need to prepare a sentence that you just throw out there, because people see through that, right?
Yes, and I understand that feeling prepared for these conversations takes some work, and you may want to write out your bullets, or maybe even better, some key words that you really want to reinforce. You may feel the need to do a fully written out script, and if that's what it takes, I understand it, but my hope for you would be you eventually could progress towards something that, while you may have some reference points, you can keep it more conversational.
Got it, okay.
And one thing I hadn't really thought of on this topic is there may be a temptation to want to just write all this out in an email instead of having a conversation, because I can make sure that I think it all through. And while that makes sure, it may help you make your case ironclad, it doesn't really allow for the two of you to be in conversation. So to the extent that you can, I would strongly encourage you to do it as a conversation, a live one, not even text. Definitely not text. Okay, so once it's time to actually have the conversation, I want you to use an acronym that's called the STATE method. The first three steps, the first three bullets are the steps you take, and the last two are the way in which you execute them. So first, I want you to share your facts and observations. These are things that happened or didn't happen without some filter of what does it mean. The second step is to tell your stories. Explain how it is that you're interpreting the situation, and you want to be very careful to avoid making stories facts. So an example, I have a teammate that was late to work 3 days out of the last 5. That is the fact. The story is, I'm beginning to wonder if you're taking your job seriously, or I'm starting to wonder what is getting in the way of you being able to show up on time. Once you've established your facts and stories, you want to open it up and invite the other person to share their observations and their stories. And there could even be some facts that you have missed. For instance, Olivian, I did send you an email the week before letting you know that I was going to be late 3 days next week because I had a client meeting off site, or I have 3 children and I had teacher meetings.
Well, that can so easily happen, Peter. And your fact might be, I did send you the email. My fact might be, I didn't get the email, but instead of recognizing that's the fact, maybe I confuse, and the story becomes, you never sent me the email. So I'm in my mind escalating it and not able to distinguish what is fact versus my interpretation of how reality happened.
Right, but even having that conversation will allow us to pivot to, okay, how can we communicate more effectively when I'm going to be late? Is it helpful if I put it on your calendar? Should I send you a text? Would you like me to remind you each day? Not saying I have to like all these things, but it shifts the conversation into how do we solve that, as opposed to some story around Peter's not taking his job seriously or doesn't care about his work.
Sure, sure.
Okay. And so the next step is it's important to remember throughout this to talk tentatively. Remain open to the idea that the story you've had may not be accurate or the whole story. So there's things you can do around that, like I'm beginning to wonder if, or it's making me curious, as opposed to you've been late 3 days, you don't take your job seriously. Encourage testing. Invite the person to present a different point of view. And if they're silent, you can even say, what have I missed? What else is out there that I'm not considering in what I've just presented?
So if at least one person has this method, this state method, it can help the conversation take place. If both people have it, then it's even better, but it's kind of required that at least one person is aware of these tools or techniques, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to practice this, you could use it on your own. And if you're feeling like it's serving you, you could think about doing some type of lunch and learn, for instance, and share the ideas with your team so that everyone can begin to use the same type of structure and language.
Sure.
What I would not do is let someone know in advance, I want to have a really important conversation with you, and to structure all of our cases, let's use this method.
Okay.
Because I think it falls into the in-between place that gets a little wonky.
Sure.
So
well,
before we pivot.
No, go ahead.
Before we pivot into the next topic, which is drilling down on giving and receiving feedback, Livian, would love to hear if there's some specific questions that the audience has that we could talk about.
We haven't gotten any, and maybe folks are so engrossed in our banter here that they forgot about questions. So I would just remind everybody, if you do have questions, use that Q&A box. We are monitoring it, and we'll try to get to them. So I think we can move on to the next topic, Peter.
Great. So I chose this one because I feel like it is one of the biggest game changers in which that will define how strong a relationship is between a manager and their team, between coworkers, and can really be a differentiator in whether we become a high-performing team or a team that just lets everyone do their work right or wrong and doesn't really think about how we can support each other. I like to use, in all of my work, I think and speak in metaphors. And when I think about giving and receiving feedback, I want you to imagine the idea of building muscle. Feedback is a muscle, and we have to exercise it. If you've not been to the gym in a long time or ever, when you begin to do this, it is going to hurt. Your body will be sore afterwards. But with enough practice and continuing at it, you'll eventually become much stronger at it, and you'll soon get to a point where you realize it doesn't really hurt at all. It actually feels like I'm allowing my capabilities to shine and supporting others.
I love that analogy,
it's not
Peter. I think maybe even if you don't get it after a while, that feedback or that exercise, something's missing. You feel like you need to get back into the gym or you start reaching out for feedback, right?
Yes. And even today, I mean, yesterday I needed to receive some feedback, and I, do I get a little bit nervous in my stomach? Sure. But on a scale of 1 to 10, it's more like a 2 when it used to be a 9 or a 10. So there are 3 ways in which receiving feedback can become challenging. The first is truth triggers. You're telling me something where I believe the feedback is wrong, unfair, or unhelpful. An example would be that you're telling me I was late last week when in fact I had already scheduled it as paid time off. Another one would be offering feedback that I'm not empowered to do anything about. I had a boss once that told me that a former client didn't think I was passionate about their business, but she told me that once we'd stopped working together, in which there was no opportunity for me to do anything about it. Another one would be a relationship trigger. I can't hear the feedback from you. And many of you with family members or significant others that often have advice, you may recognize this is true for me. I am not able to receive a lot of advice on my coaching business from my spouse, even though it is very often accurate and true. And then the third would be identity triggers. The feedback is threatening and I feel off balance. So one of my values would be around integrity and honesty. If Olivian were to present some feedback that suggested that I had violated any of those things, it would really be hard for me to receive it. Doesn't mean I don't want to hear it, but it would, I would feel off balance for a moment. So, but the motivation for us to do this is that the feedback-seeking behavior is linked to higher job satisfaction, greater creativity on the job, faster adaptation in a new organization or role, and lower turnover. And seeking out negative feedback is associated with higher performance ratings. And Facebook, as an example, really encourages an environment in which people ask for the feedback instead of waiting for it to come. And if you think about it, it takes a lot more courage for you to offer unsolicited feedback with a coworker than it would if they're asking you, how did that presentation go? What could I refine to make it even better? Just lowers the barrier and creates more safety.
So Peter, tell me a little bit more here, please, that seeking out negative feedback, what's behind the negative word here? Is that the fact that many people are asking for feedback when they really are asking for a pat on the back, and you want to be sensitive that, hey, I do need to get better. I need something that you didn't like in what I did. Is that what you're trying to highlight there?
Yeah, I mean, whether you're the intern or the CEO, there's always something that we can get better on, some way that we can grow. It aligns with the notion of being in a growth mindset or an idea of lifelong learning. I was naive in thinking the day that I graduated from Anderson that my learning days were over. And thankfully, I've pivoted into a different idea, which is there's always ways for me to grow. Now, if I'm being transparent, my presence in presentations is an edge that I will always be wanting to get better on.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So there are 3 different types of feedback, and we need all 3, but you want to be careful not to confuse them. So to the best that you can have, if you need to have more than one of these, have them in separate conversations. So the first one is appreciation. This would be to see, acknowledge, connect, motivate, thank someone. Olivian, thank you for that report. I like the attention to detail. You highlighted some things that prior reports had not brought forward. A second example is coaching, helping the reader to expand their knowledge, sharpen skill, improve their capability, or if there's an imbalance in the relationship, bringing that forward. So an example here, Olivian, during that presentation, you focused a lot of your attention on the leaders that were sitting at the table. I'd love for us to think about what are some ways in which you might give attention to some of the questions from the people that were sitting in the chairs outside of the table. What are ideas that you have on how we might do that? And you can tell that if someone goes in thinking they're getting appreciation and instead they get the coaching, it can be a little bit dysregulating. And then the third one, evaluation, to rate or rank against a set of standards, to align expectations, to inform decision-making. So if you think about these examples that I have below, let's talk a little bit about where they would fall. An annual performance review is most directly in a form of evaluation. You're being rated on a set of metrics, and very often it's relative to your peers. A career action planning, that one often falls into the coaching bucket because you're wanting to hear a little bit more around what the person wants to do and helping them figure out what are some strategies they could try and how you can support them to make that an opportunity. And then the third one, feedback on a presentation, it could fall into either appreciation or coaching.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was thinking, is there maybe a disconnect between the fact that most folks, or many, I should say, when they are seeking feedback, they're looking for appreciation, and then when you have a strong desire to share feedback, maybe the most immediate desire is to be kind of a coaching or evaluation, and then you clarifying what type of feedback you're talking about can help you make it effective.
Yes, you've hit the nail on the head. So if someone's asking you for feedback, ask them what type of feedback are you wanting, because you can go in thinking they're expecting one and they want a different type. And if you are the one that's offering it unsolicited, I think it's helpful to give clarity on what type it is at the beginning. So they don't go in thinking it's appreciation and then realizing it's something else.
So we're getting some questions now, and I'll start with one very much on point here. How do you approach critical conversations with your boss? So you have the hierarchy to consider. When you feel that he or she doesn't want to hear feedback, they're just seeking buy-in for a decision that's already been made. So maybe it's not feedback about you, but it's more related to a decision that was made.
Okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, they're just wanting you, the feeling is that you're just wanting to say, they're wanting you to say, yes, I'm on board. One thing that comes to mind is if you would ask them would they be open to experimenting with something? And I'm going to role play this for just a moment, but imagine Sarah is my manager. Sarah, I realize that we are far along in the decision-making process on Project X, and I understand the reasons why we need to move forward. I'm also trying to exercise my skill set in communicating a perspective and demonstrating my ability to work through some of these challenges. Would you be open for us having a conversation around some other perspectives on this, recognizing that the ship may have already sailed on this one and it's more for learning purposes?
Got it. Okay. We're getting quite a few questions actually now. So one from our mutual friend, Adam.
Hi, Adam.
What if you are asked to provide appreciation and coaching and evaluation all in the same conversation? Is that ideal? Is that not ideal? Should you try to carve out time for each type?
I mean, to the extent as the leader or peer that you have the autonomy to make this, having them as separate conversations is really powerful. Okay. For instance, career action planning conversations, I do not recommend having at the same time that you're giving someone a performance review or talking about their bonus or raise. If you're in a situation where that is not within your control, I think it's important to have really discrete moments. So let's first establish all the things that are going well and how much I appreciate the work that you've done. Walk through all of those things. And this is part of what we even talk about when we do a feedback sandwich. If you can establish all the things that are going well for the person, it gives them a more stable foundation to then receive what's not working. But being very explicit when we're switching from appreciation to coaching, would you be open to having some conversations around some areas where I've observed some opportunities for you to become even more effective than you are today?
So separation, or at the very least, transition, clear transition, are important steps there.
Right. I mean, even in my work as a coach, there's a premise that I'm not there to give them the answers. I'm there to let them answer them. But there are times where they truly do want examples of what I've done or what someone else has done. And I'm explicit. I'm going to take off my coach's hat now and put on my friend, my colleague, my consultant hat. So you can do that in a feedback conversation as well.
Got it.
So we need all three types of feedback from the prior slide, but mixing them confuses them, as I've discussed. A few things to think about as you're going into these conversations. Evaluation is the loudest, and it can drown out the other two. Part of the reason why you want to have those as separate conversations. Beware of cross transactions. This could mean that you're wanting a different type of feedback than what's been given, and interpreting feedback as a different type than what was intended. So an example of this would be, and this is an example where it's very helpful to be upfront with the person. And if you're not clear, you could ask them, what type of feedback is it that you're offering? The next thing, ask yourself 3 questions as you're going into it. What's my purpose in giving and receiving this feedback? Is it the right purpose from my point of view? Is it the right purpose from the other person's point of view? And a few tools if you want to refine your ability to give and receive feedback. Figure out the right time. There's this whole trade-off of immediacy versus primacy, and what works for one person may look very different for someone else. On the whole, it's better to offer feedback relatively quickly after the moment where it became something that's on your mind. But doing it, for instance, in a table with all of their peers may not be the most effective way for them to build safety and to receive the information. And as part of that process of building safety, ask for permission. Are you open to having a conversation around how we can have a more effective working relationship? And that can include, is now the right time? You be prepared for the other person to ask, can we do this at a later date? And that isn't necessarily, I don't want to have the conversation at all. It may mean that they haven't had all this time to get in that mindset and they need a moment, or there's something going on that they need to give their attention to. But interestingly, asking permission and being unattached to the answer will often disarm them, and they will be more eager to do it quickly. And that even talks about point 2 on a line on the parameters. Asking the person how they'd like to receive it. Some will be upfront and say, I need to hear some things that are going well before you tell me what it is that I need to work on. But you asking the question allows them to feel empowered. And more often than not, I found that they'll say, just let's cut straight to it. I appreciate your willingness to have this conversation. So what do you do if you disagree? And that is inevitable when you're dealing with high stakes conversations. It's okay to share your reactions while continuing to remain open. So someone's told me that I've done something that is out of alignment with my value of integrity. I'm not left with the options of agreeing or disagreeing with them. I can say, this is upsetting to hear. I may need some time to process that. So you can also avoid the pressure to have the perfect response in the moment. So you can say, I need some time to process this and I'd like to circle back with you. Or this is hard to hear, but I really want to understand what you're saying because this is important for me and it's important for you. The next one, you may get some feedback that 98% of it feels untrue, unhelpful, inaccurate. Whenever I'm working with someone, I invite them to look at what could be true in all of that. And it may be one little tidbit, like what is the value of that and what is it that you want to do with it? The rest of it that really isn't serving you, you have permission to kind of put that off to the side. And then this last one, watch out for switch tracks. Be aware of when there are two different topics. So acknowledge that and make the request of, Jack, you're wanting to talk about our strategy. I'm wanting to talk about our staffing plan. Both are important conversations. Can we have one and then switch to the other? As opposed to trying to pretend that
Sure.
we're going to address both of them in the same one. So I'm not going to walk through this one, but as a takeaway for all of you, I'd like to invite you to go through these questions, answer them for yourself, and if you feel comfortable, you may want to try sharing them with your colleagues and teams so that they can get an understanding of how best to work with you. And to take it a step further, it could be fun even to share these questions, invite everybody to share them. I've even seen teams that will have some almost cheat sheet that they put up on their cubicle walls that allow others and themselves to remember what are some of the things that set them up for success. So Olivia, and before we switch gears, are there questions on your mind, ones that are coming up in the Q&A?
Well, there are a couple, and I'm sensitive to time. I think some of them you provided some tools, maybe not fully, but they deal with emotion, anger at work, potentially kind of sense of job safety in some of these difficult conversations. So let's not go through them now. Let's go to the next section. If we have time at the end, we'll do that. If not, maybe we can engage directly with the people who asked.
That sounds great. So I'm going to speed up in the interest of time. This next part I want to talk about are powerful questions. And in particular, these are questions that you can be asking yourself. When a challenging situation happens, a natural place that many of us go, myself included, would be things that sound like judger questions. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with them? Whose fault is it? That can often take a very pessimistic viewpoint, and it's hard to create real opportunity out of those lenses. It's more like, how do we find out who's to blame, as opposed to what are we going to do moving forward? The way that you can get further to the right in the questions that are in learner mode, is to ask any of these questions in the middle section. So am I in judger? Said another way, is the lens in which I'm looking through things all around judgment as opposed to solutions? Do I want to feel this way? And if not, how else do I want to feel about it? Or acknowledging I feel bad about this, how else might I think about the situation? Allows us to begin to pivot to the right side of the screen and get more focused on the learner questions. What works? What about this is good? What opportunities are there for me to learn in this situation? I like this third one. What are the facts and what am I assuming? You may be going down a different story that is very different from what the reality is, and that can allow you to hone in on that specific point.
I mean, facts are what are not subject to opinion, right? So distinguishing that, and I can recall a couple of conversations happening publicly now that maybe asking that question would be helpful to the conversation we're having as a nation.
Absolutely. So some tools around powerful questions. Shorter is better. If you're asking the questions of others, avoid questions that can be answered with a yes or no. I also like to prioritize what questions as opposed to why questions. So Peter, what were you thinking about when you chose to order Indian food for dinner tonight? What was important to you, as opposed to why did you order Indian? Which you can tell even in how I deliver it, it can be received as having some level of judgment or criticism in it.
Sure.
Allow yourself and others to create possibilities. We're in a tough conversation. What would success look like? How can we move forward in a positive way? How will I know we've reached our goal? This one, when I'm coaching someone who's really stuck and they say, I don't know what to do, I'd say, well, is that true? What are some of the pieces of this that you already know to do? And you may find that out of a marathon, that helps them get half of the way and it becomes a much less daunting prospect. And then this last one, what are some productive options for advancing the situation? This takes it away from like, what's the one thing we can do to turning it into more of a collaborative brainstorm. So in the interest of time, and I can tell my headset's about to die, so I'm going to switch my phone. I want to talk about leading for today. And in particular, how do we navigate this distance working environment so that we're not mechanical and we're not leaning towards something that feels like we're just jumping straight into business, or we're making small talk that doesn't make any progress. So many of you may have noticed over the last 3 months how important personal check-ins have become to working effectively with your team. And for, I'd say, the first month or so, the question of how are you doing would cut it, because it let them know that you were focused on them. But if you want to actually take this to a deeper level and get to know each other well, there are some even more powerful questions you might ask, like, what's it like to be you right now? What's a high and a low since we last spoke? Or since a lot of us are experimenting with different things during this period, what have you tried that's serving you and you might want to hold on to after work from home is done? The next step is to use breakout functions. When you're using anything like Zoom, you want to use that to create psychological safety. So if you've got a team of 15 people, presenting a question or a challenge and inviting them to go into more intimate breakout rooms will make the introverts more comfortable speaking. And the people that have something on their mind but may feel a little risky to share it with a larger group can serve it up in a safer way. And then the group can come back as a larger entity and bring forward what were some of the themes that came up. And this last piece was a tip I heard Keith Ferrazzi talk about, which is bulletproofing. It's when someone presents something to us, let's talk about what challenges could we offer this person that might minimize the risk. So inviting some healthy criticism. What crazy innovative ideas would help us take this thinking to the next level? And what could we do to help this person? So instead of how do we pick it apart, what support, resources, or best practices could we offer? So I know that we've covered a lot of ground and we're about up on time, but Olivian, are there any other questions that you'd like to serve up to the group?
You know, we do have one that we can take. It came up during the feedback session, and the question is, what is the best way to deal with emotion, especially anger? For instance, a coworker or a boss who is mad at you. So maybe this is not a planned feedback conversation. It just comes up. Obviously, the anger component is sudden generally. So do you have some tools or recommendations for how to deal with that?
Sure. First, if the emotion is deep sadness or even crying, one thing that I recommend is you may have a box of tissues handy. I do not recommend handing the tissue to them because that suggests that you're wanting them to stop crying, but even just making it someplace where they can access it if they need it. And if the anger is the emotion that you are seeing, I personally think it's more effective to acknowledge that I can tell that this is a topic that you care a lot about. Labeling it as anger can often lead into some debate about whether or not I'm in anger or not. You've probably, if any of you that have kids, it's like telling a child, you seem tired, and then they become even more determined to prove to you in anger that they're not tired.
And maybe be aware of safety. Obviously, don't want to escalate something that's already flammable.
Right. So for instance, if things start to get really heated, you could say, you know, I can tell that there's a lot of emotions here. I think it might be productive for us to take a break on this. Are you okay with that? And would you be open to revisiting this at a later point? And if you know that anger is likely to be an emotion in the situation, you might even want to consider bringing in a third party into the conversation, because that can neutralize some of that.
Got it. Okay. Well, Peter, this was awesome. I was taking notes, and I do have 3 takeaways to share. And I'll start with the analogy that feedback is no different than building muscle. Not only that it takes reps, but also that you can feel a bit sore after you do it.
Yes.
I liked your state method, the share, tell, ask, talk, and encourage. I think that's a good one to be mindful of. And then I had another one. I could have gone on for a long time, by the way, but these were the ones that came up first. But the drive towards perpetual efficiency in this remote work environment, don't forget to be mindful of that, and don't forget to make time for genuine personal check-ins, and do that at work and do that at home as well.
Thank you for those shares, Olivia. And I think for anybody that's processing all of this, my personal definition of success would not be that you adopt all of this at once, but hopefully there's at least one thing you want to experiment with. And communication is a continuum. It's a lifelong journey, and we can always be making progress that gets us one step closer to being more effective at it.
Well, Peter, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for tuning in, and apologies, we had a couple of questions we didn't get to, but we'll follow up with you. We'll also send the presentation materials, and should we be able to do this, the video recording, and we'll have a little survey for you as well. Again, Peter, big thank you. So good to see you, and allowing us to get some of the knowledge that you share with your clients. And everybody, thanks for tuning in, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Olivia, and thank you to the San Diego chapter and all the Anderson community for being here today.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.